What if every broken piece reveals perfect wholeness? You often perceive a crack, a fissure, or a fragment as a sign of something lost, something requiring repair. Yet consider for a moment if these very perceived imperfections are not deficits, but rather the precise contours through which an inherent, perfect completeness can truly be observed. What if the striving to mend obscures the quiet truth that nothing was ever truly broken? The first rays of morning often found humanity engaged in a delicate ballet, a silent, intricate dance of presentation. Outwardly, the world spun with an agreeable rhythm, the steady pulse of routine, the soft hum of domesticity, the gentle promise of a new day. For many, circumstances aligned in pleasing patterns, a measure of security, a thread of connection, the satisfaction of purposeful engagement. Yet within the quiet sanctuary of the self, or perhaps at the edges of conscious thought, a peculiar sensation frequently resided. It was not always a clamorous cry, but rather a persistent, low hum, an echo of disquiet, a whisper hinting that despite all apparent harmony, an essential piece remained elusive, just beyond reach. This feeling of familiar unrest often lingered like an uninvited guest, politely refusing to depart, subtly coloring the very fabric of existence. This gnawing sense of lacking, this subtle incompleteness, became a secret burden carried by countless souls. It manifested not as overt crisis, but as an insidious undercurrent. A fleeting thought in a moment of triumph, a slight hesitation in an embrace, an inexplicable pang during quiet introspection. One might observe a neighbor seemingly composed and content, or a friend sharing laughter, and assume an unblemished inner landscape. Yet often, that same individual harbored a similar, unspoken apprehension, a private conviction that they, fundamentally, were not quite enough. This internal dissonance, this highest point of the human condition's quiet struggle, fueled a meticulous, almost unconscious artistry, the crafting of a seamless exterior. The impulse to conceal these perceived flaws became a fundamental aspect of human interaction. Every perceived crack, every nascent fissure in the carefully constructed self was addressed with diligent effort. One learned early on to smooth over rough edges, to present a polished surface, to articulate thoughts and feelings in ways that implied an unwavering inner fortress. The meticulousness was profound. Gestures were refined, words carefully chosen, vulnerabilities expertly veiled. Even in the deepest solitude, the echo of societal expectation, or perhaps self-expectation, persisted, dictating the constant refurbishment of one's inner and outer image. The unspoken rule seemed to be that to reveal a perceived imperfection was to risk fundamental rejection, to expose a vulnerability that might invite judgment, or worse, confirm one's own deepest fear of being truly deficient. Consider the natural world, in stark contrast to this human artifice. The grand mountains, sculpted over eons, bear the indelible marks of erosion, deep valleys carved by ancient waters, jagged peaks honed by relentless winds. These are not seen as flaws in their design, but as testaments to their journey, integral to their majesty. A mighty oak, having withstood countless seasons, displays gnarled branches and a furrowed bark, each twist and scar narrating a story of resilience, not breakage. The very earth itself, perpetually reforming, allows its surface to crack, to yield, to fragment, only for new life to emerge from these perceived ruptures. A seed, for instance, must first break open, its hard shell yielding before the tender sprout can ascend towards the light. These processes, often violent in their execution, are universally recognized as cycles of renewal, of transformation, of becoming. There is no attempt in nature to conceal the fragmentation, for the breaking is understood as an essential preface to a deeper integration. This subtle, pervasive drive to mend and conceal, so inherent in the human experience, seemed to whisper a profound misunderstanding. What if these perceived imperfections, these moments of perceived fragmentation, were not deviations from a perfect state, but rather the very pathways through which a more profound, inherent completeness revealed itself? What if the discomfort that nudged one to hide their true self was, in fact, an invitation to look deeper, to question the very definition of what it meant to be whole? The familiar unrest, therefore, was not merely an affliction to be overcome, but perhaps a key, subtly urging an individual to unlock a truth hidden in plain sight, that the universe, in its grand design, might perceive these broken pieces as exquisite details, indispensable to the overarching, perfect tapestry of being. The pervasive sentiment of not enoughness, when viewed through this lens, transformed from a private failing into a universal hint of an underlying intelligent design, quietly beckoning one towards a deeper inquiry into the very nature of existence. Having discerned the subtle, persistent echo of disquiet, humanity often embarked upon a relentless quest for solace, turning its gaze outward, convinced that the missing piece resided somewhere beyond the confines of self. This common inclination led to an array of elaborate endeavors, each a testament to the fervent hope of finally bridging the perceived chasm within. Individuals, in their myriad forms, began to pursue what appeared to be tangible answers, investing immense energy into pathways universally accepted as routes to fulfillment. Yet an unseen mechanism often ensured that these well-trodden paths ultimately led not to lasting peace, but merely back to the familiar, if subdued, echo of incompleteness. One pervasive avenue for this outward-directed striving involved the intricate dance of seeking affirmation from others. The validation of peers, the praise of superiors, the adoration of a public, these became potent elixirs, promising to fill the void. One might meticulously craft a public persona, seeking resonant applause for achievements, or carefully curate the narrative of one's life to elicit admiration. The temporary swell of positive regard often brought a transient sense of buoyancy, a brief reprieve from the internal hum of insufficiency. During moments of widespread commendation, a person might feel uplifted, their being seemingly expanded by the collective approval. The sense of belonging, of being seen and appreciated, offered a fleeting balm. However, as quickly as the spotlight shifted or the chorus of praise softened, the internal barometer often reset. The uplifted feeling would dissipate, leaving behind a subtle craving for the next surge of external approval, the next public nod, creating an insatiable cycle where true satiation remained perpetually out of reach. The very act of relying on outside recognition rendered one's inner state dependent on forces beyond one's control, subtly reinforcing the notion that one's worth was not intrinsic, but rather bestowed. Parallel to the pursuit of external validation, unfolded the compelling narrative of accumulating material possessions. The world presented an endless array of objects, each imbued with the promise of enhanced contentment, of greater status, of a more complete existence. From the grandest dwellings to the smallest, most exquisite adornments, the acquisition of goods became a prevailing strategy to quiet the inner disquiet. The initial thrill of ownership, the satisfaction of possessing something coveted, often brought a powerful, albeit temporary, surge of delight. A new acquisition might spark a brief sense of triumph, a fleeting belief that a particular gap had finally been closed. For a time, the sheen of the new object, or the comfort of an upgraded environment, seemed to silence the earlier whispers of discontent. Yet with a quiet inevitability, the novelty faded. The object, once so desired, became part of the landscape, its power to fill the internal space diminishing with each passing day. The sensation of lack would then resurface, not necessarily as a desire for the same object again, but for the next, equally promising acquisition, perpetuating a continuous chase that never quite caught its elusive quarry. The very nature of this pursuit inadvertently taught that wholeness was something to be gained rather than something to be recognized. Then there were the ambitious strivings for fleeting achievements, the climb up the professional ladder, the securing of a coveted position, the triumph in a competitive arena, or the mastering of a demanding skill. These were endeavors where the goal was clear, the effort measurable, and the victory often celebrated. The focus required, the dedication demanded, provided a sense of purpose and direction. The moment of culmination, the crossing of the finish line, the public acknowledgement of success, frequently evoked a powerful rush of exhilaration, a feeling of having finally made it, of having achieved a significant measure of personal completeness. For a precious period, the world seemed to align, and the self felt whole, capable, and profoundly satisfied. Yet the very nature of achievement implied a completion of a specific task, a resolution of a particular challenge. Once the summit was reached, the flag planted, a new plateau invariably presented itself. The previous achievement, while still a fact, receded into the past, and the inner barometer of satisfaction often drifted back to its accustomed setting. The striving began anew for the next goal, the next challenge, leading to an endless series of temporary highs, followed by a return to the underlying conviction that true, lasting completeness remained just one more effort away. It became increasingly clear that these outward-directed efforts, however noble or well-intentioned, often operated under a subtle yet profound misconception. Each pursuit, whether for validation, possession, or achievement, implicitly affirmed the initial premise that something was indeed missing, that the individual was inherently lacking, and therefore required mending. The constant striving to acquire, to prove, to overcome, paradoxically reinforced the belief in one's own deficiency. The very act of perpetually seeking to complete oneself from external sources inadvertently solidified the inner conviction that one was, indeed, incomplete. It was a cycle that fed upon itself, creating an illusion of mending that in its relentless pursuit inadvertently perpetuated the very sense of brokenness it sought to alleviate. This guided a quiet, internal reflection. What if the solution lay not in the relentless pursuit of an external more, but in a profound reevaluation of the initial premise itself? After the relentless pursuit through external landscapes, a quiet exhaustion often settled, not the fatigue of the body, but a subtle weariness of the spirit. The grand structures of acquired wealth, the glittering trophies of public acclaim, the fleeting highs of transient admiration, all, in their turn, had failed to quell the persistent, subtle pang of incompleteness. This realization, arriving not as a thunderclap, but as a gentle, unwavering dawn, began to shift the very ground upon which perception stood. It was a turning inward, a slow unclenching of the outward grasp, as if the hands, tired of reaching, finally rested, ready to feel what had always been present. This shift was not an act of surrender, but an awakening. The familiar lens, through which perceived flaws were magnified and diligently hidden, began to subtly refract light in a new direction. What once appeared as deficiency, as areas requiring fervent repair or desperate concealment, started to unveil themselves as something entirely different. It was a movement from viewing life's challenging experiences, the moments of stumble, the instances of perceived failure, the scars left by difficult passages, as regrettable aberrations, to witnessing them as integral, even beautiful components within a grander, more intricate design. This transition marked the nascent embrace of a radical acceptance, not born of resignation, but of profound recognition. Consider a person like Kai. He had, for many seasons, navigated his days with a quiet vigilance, aware of the subtle ways he felt less than, The moments when his inner self seemed to diverge from the polished facade he presented. He had sought to smooth over these internal divergences, to fill them with the myriad offerings of the world, much like many others. Yet one quiet afternoon, in the hushed corner of a small, unadorned room, his attention was drawn to an object that had sat unremarkable for years. A simple, aged clay vessel. It was not a perfect specimen. Its surface bore a network of fine cracks, the result of time's gentle persuasion and perhaps a forgotten mishap. A tiny chip graced its rim, and one side displayed a faint discoloration, hinting at long-past use. Initially, Kai had perceived these marks as blemishes, signs of its age and vulnerability, features that would diminish its value in the eyes of others. He might even have contemplated restoring it, attempting to erase the history etched upon its surface. But on this particular day, as the gentle light filtered through a nearby opening, illuminating the vessel in an unexpected way, something shifted within his gaze. He no longer saw mere damage. Instead, he began to trace the delicate lines with his eyes, noticing how each fissure, each subtle imperfection, contributed to the object's unique character. The cracks were not detracting from its form, they were enhancing it, creating a topography of experience that gave it a story, a depth that a pristine, unblemished object could never possess. The chipped rim, far from being a flaw, felt like a silent testament to enduring use, a soft echo of hands that had held it, liquids it had contained, moments it had witnessed. In that singular moment, an understanding sparked within Kai. The vessel, in its apparent brokenness, revealed a profound completeness, a beauty that resided precisely because of its journey, not in spite of it. The inherent strength of the clay was not negated by its vulnerability. Rather, its capacity to endure and still hold its form, even with these visible traces, became its truest testament. This observation resonated deeply, a quiet revelation that transcended the object itself. It began to unravel the deeply ingrained belief that wholeness equated to an absence of marks, an absence of challenge, an absence of perceived imperfection. This new way of seeing extended beyond ancient pottery. Kai started to observe how the profound beauty in an individual's narrative often emerged from the very experiences that had been labeled as failures or hardships. He began to recognize that the moments of stumbling, the periods of sorrow, the times when one felt utterly fragmented, were not detours from the path to completeness, but rather the very material from which resilience was woven, from which empathy blossomed, from which a deeper wisdom was forged. The broken pieces were not evidence of something lost, but rather distinct, resonant elements, each contributing its own unique frequency to the symphony of a life fully lived. This profound clarity fostered a nascent understanding. True strength was not an impenetrable shield, but the courageous willingness to acknowledge and integrate one's entire spectrum of experiences, including those previously deemed vulnerable or imperfect. It was in the very act of not needing to mend, not needing to conceal, that a new kind of power began to emerge, a power born of radical acceptance, a recognition of an inherent, inviolable completeness that had always been present, merely obscured by the illusion of separate, fragmented parts. The deep disquiet began to recede, replaced by a quiet wonder at the unfolding tapestry of existence, where every thread, regardless of its appearance, played a vital, irreplaceable role. With the quiet revelation of imperfection's resonance, the landscape of understanding expanded, unfurling a deeper truth about the nature of completeness. The shift from perceiving deficiency to embracing radical acceptance laid the groundwork for a profound recognition that every single experience, without exception, contributed indispensably to the singular, perfect design of an individual's being. This was not a passive acceptance of fate, but an active, conscious integration, a profound seeing of how all threads, regardless of their apparent texture or hue, were interwoven into a seamless tapestry. The long-held belief that wholeness was a state achieved by excising imperfections, by sanding down rough edges until a pristine surface remained, began to dissolve. Instead, a new perspective emerged, one that illuminated wholeness not as an imagined absence of challenge or sorrow, but as the rich, full, and conscious understanding of every aspect of one's journey. It was a realization that the entirety of life's unfoldings, the jubilant highs, the somber lows, the moments of stark clarity, and the periods of bewildering confusion, were all equally vital strokes in the grand masterpiece of existence. No stroke could be removed without diminishing the whole, no color deemed superfluous. Imagine an ancient, skilled weaver creating a magnificent tapestry. Each thread, sourced from various places and possessing unique characteristics, is chosen with deliberate intent. There are threads of vibrant joy, shimmering with the golden light of success and connection. These are easy to admire, to celebrate, and often form the focal points of the design. But then there are threads of deep sorrow, dark and muted, perhaps even coarse to the touch. In a conventional view, one might be tempted to discard these, to believe that a beautiful tapestry would be better served without their somber presence. Yet the master weaver understands that these very threads of shadow provide depth, contrast, and definition. They allow the brighter colors to truly sing, giving dimension and richness that an exclusively bright piece could never achieve. Without the dark, the light holds less meaning. Similarly, there are threads that appear frayed, perhaps even tangled or knotted. These might represent moments of confusion, instances of perceived failure, or periods of profound uncertainty in an individual's life. One might instinctively wish to cut these out, to smooth them away, believing they mar the overall perfection. Yet in the hands of the master weaver, the guiding intelligence of existence, even these seemingly imperfect threads are not mistakes. They are moments of tension that create texture, unique points of interest that give the tapestry its distinct character. A knot might be the very point where two disparate experiences became irrevocably linked, forming a crucial pivot in the overall pattern. A frayed edge might speak of resilience, of having weathered a storm and still holding fast. These are the narratives of endurance, of transformation, that add profound resonance to the final design. This metaphorical weaving of life revealed that there was no such thing as a wrong experience. Every event, every emotion, every relationship, every perceived mistake or triumph served as an essential thread. The quiet solitude that once felt like loneliness could now be seen as a period of crucial introspection, a thread of deep indigo allowing for internal growth. The challenging interaction that left one feeling vulnerable could be understood as a thread of gritty texture, building resilience and compassion. The unexpected detour from a well-planned path, once a source of frustration, revealed itself as a vibrant, contrasting thread, leading to unforeseen beauty and understanding. Kai, having pondered the ancient vessel, began to apply this understanding to the narratives of his own life and those he observed around him. He saw how moments of profound personal difficulty, once considered blemishes to be overcome, were precisely what had cultivated a unique empathy within him, allowing him to connect with others on a deeper level. His past vulnerabilities, once sources of quiet shame, transformed into wellsprings of genuine strength and relatability. He recognized that if even one perceived flaw were removed from his personal tapestry, the entire pattern would subtly but irrevocably shift, losing a measure of its unique beauty, its inherent strength, its particular story. True wholeness, therefore, was not a static, flawless state, but a dynamic, unfolding integration. It was the conscious act of allowing every thread of experience to exist within the fabric of being, recognizing its indispensable role in the creation of the complete, perfect pattern that was one's own life. This understanding fostered a profound sense of peace, a quiet knowing that nothing truly needed to be mended, for nothing was ever truly broken. It was merely interwoven. After traversing the paths of outward seeking and arriving at the profound acceptance of life's intricate tapestry, a new way of inhabiting existence began to unfold. This was not a final destination reached after arduous travel, but rather a quiet, undeniable recognition that the journey itself had merely been an unveiling. The truth was not something to be acquired, but a state of inherent completeness already present, obscured only by the relentless pursuit of what was believed to be missing. To live from this core understanding was to embody a different posture towards the world, a subtle yet fundamental recalibration of one's entire being. This profound recognition altered an individual's relationship with time itself, particularly with the future and its inevitable challenges. Where once an anticipated difficulty might have sparked anxiety, prompting a flurry of planning and preemptive striving to avoid perceived failure, now a different response emerged. The understanding that every experience, even the most arduous, contributed indispensably to one's unique design, fostered a quiet resilience. Challenges were no longer viewed as threats to an imagined, perfect facade, but as intricate, perhaps demanding, threads in the weaving that would ultimately deepen the richness and complexity of the whole. There was a sense that whatever arose, it would be integrated, not as something to be overcome and then forgotten, but as an essential component that would leave its indelible, valuable mark. This embodiment of completeness naturally gave rise to a powerful, authentic self-compassion. The relentless inner critic, so often fueled by the belief in one's inherent shortcomings, began to soften its voice. Moments of human fallibility, once sources of deep shame or regret, transformed into opportunities for gentle understanding. If every broken piece was, in fact, an essential component of an unfolding wholeness, then there was no longer a need to punish oneself for being precisely what one was. Mistakes became lessons, vulnerabilities became points of connection, and perceived failures transmuted into profound learning curves. This internal shift cultivated a deep, unwavering kindness towards oneself, acknowledging the intricate dance of human experience without judgment, embracing the entirety of one's being with an abiding warmth. The most liberating consequence of this recognition was the profound release from the continuous, often exhausting pursuit of external fixes. The long, arduous cycle of seeking validation from others, accumulating material possessions, or striving for fleeting achievements began to quiet. The internal engine that drove this ceaseless chase, fueled by the conviction of incompleteness, simply ran out of impetus. Why seek to mend what was never truly broken? Why strive to become more when an abundance of inherent completeness was already fully present? This liberation was not a cessation of engagement with the world, but a transformation of it. Actions flowed not from a place of deficit, but from a wellspring of quiet abundance, motivated by genuine purpose, connection, or joy, rather than a desperate attempt to fill an inner void. Consider Lena, who had spent many seasons navigating her days with a subtle undercurrent of striving. She had, like many, sought external affirmation in her work, carefully curated her environment, and diligently pursued various accomplishments, each offering a temporary sense of fulfillment before the familiar whisper of "not enough" returned. Yet as the understanding of inherent completeness quietly took root within her, a profound transformation began to manifest in her daily interactions. Lena found a new sense of calm residing at her core. The frantic energy that once propelled her through tasks, driven by a need to prove her worth, began to dissipate. Instead, her actions stemmed from a place of clarity, a quiet knowing that her value was intrinsic, immutable. In conversations, she listened with a depth she hadn't known before, no longer preoccupied with crafting the right response, or ensuring she appeared knowledgeable. She simply allowed herself to be present, to connect from a space of genuine interest, finding that her interactions became richer, more authentic. When faced with a difficult decision, Lena no longer felt the familiar grip of anxiety, the pressure to choose the perfect path lest she fall short. Instead, she approached these moments with a quiet confidence, knowing that whatever outcome arose, it would, in its own way, contribute to her unfolding experience. She discovered a profound sense of peace, not in the absence of challenges, but in the unwavering understanding that she already possessed everything required to meet them, not through external acquisition, but through her very being. Lena experienced life as a constant, gentle unfolding, each moment arising from a place of quiet abundance, rather than a constant, exhausting striving to become something she inherently already was. The illusion of separate, broken pieces had dissolved, revealing a seamless, vibrant wholeness, always and forever present. As we conclude this reflection, we are left not with a sense of finality, but with a gentle invitation to perceive the world anew. Perhaps the deepest comfort lies in recognizing that the very aspects we once sought to mend, the fragments we believe were signs of incompleteness, are in fact the exquisite contours of our truest, most complete selves. What if the striving always to fix obscured the quiet truth of what was always perfectly present? It is a profound shift from a world of striving to one of profound acceptance. This journey of understanding, much like our own lives, is a continuous unfolding. We invite you to continue these thoughtful explorations with us here on the Alan Watts Echo. In the quiet moments of your own reflection, what was the most subtle, persistent echo of disquiet that ultimately guided you toward a deeper sense of your inherent completeness? Thank you for sharing this space of contemplation. Until our next gathering, may your days be filled with quiet clarity. Next time, we shall delve into the nature of freedom, asking if true liberation lies not in escape, but in the embrace of all that simply is.